You think you know pain. You think you've pushed yourself to your limits. In a gym, on a battlefield game screen, or maybe through military training videos that make you wince at every shout and bruise. But you've never known the kind of pain a medieval crusader called discipline. You're standing in the dust of the Holy Land. The year is 1187. The air smells of salt, iron, and dried sweat. The sun doesn't shine, it burns. Before you, a line of men stand motionless, chainmail clinging to their skin like molten metal. Their white surcoats are soaked through with sweat, clotted with blood. Not from battle, not today. This is training. And training, for a crusader, was torture. A Templar Knight walks down the row. His boots grind over sand and bone fragments. In his hand, a whip braided from horsehide, not for punishment but for purification. Each lash sings through the air with a sound sharper than steel. When it strikes, the recruits don't flinch. They don't dare. Not because they're fearless, but because flinching means another round. The Templar's eyes are empty. He's not angry. He's not cruel. He's faithful. This wasn't discipline as we know it. This was sanctified suffering. The idea that pain could burn sin away, that torment was the path to holiness. Forget what the movies showed you. Forget gleaming armor and noble marches into battle. Real crusader life wasn't glorious. It was a constant negotiation with agony. You'd think the crusaders spent their time fighting. They didn't. The real war was between the body and the soul, fought daily in training fields, inside stone fortresses, and in the desert heat that killed as many as the enemy's blades. Every Templar, Hospitaller, or Teutonic Knight was bound by a rule stricter than any monastic order in Europe. They weren't just soldiers, they were monks of war. And that meant vows, obedience, chastity, poverty, and endurance. Pain was a prayer. Deprivation was devotion. Sleep was rationed. Meat was rare. Conversation was limited. Laughter was banned. Even their meals were a kind of punishment. Imagine this: a bowl of thin lentil broth, eaten in silence. The air thick with incense and body odor. If one recruit reached for bread before the appointed prayer, he'd be dragged out, stripped, and flogged. Not because he disobeyed a man, but because he defied God's order. This was the psychological foundation of crusader discipline. Obedience that erased the self. You didn't question orders, you didn't argue, and you didn't think of your comfort. To doubt your superior was to doubt Christ. To hesitate was to sin. Historians often describe the crusader training grounds as the harshest form of religious conditioning Europe ever produced. Modern military boot camps look like holiday camps in comparison. The difference is that modern soldiers train to survive. Crusaders trained to die, and to die well. Their mindset wasn't win or lose. It was suffer and be purified. But where did this madness come from? It wasn't random. It was doctrine, forged by Bernard of Clairvaux, the monk who helped define the Templar Code in the 12th century. He wrote that the Knight of Christ kills for Christ and dies for Christ. In either case, he served Christ. To him, death in battle wasn't tragedy. It was salvation. So imagine what kind of training philosophy grows from that. Every whip crack, every bleeding hand, every blister beneath a chainmail shirt wasn't cruelty. It was theology. And this theology had structure. Templar routines followed a schedule so strict it bordered on inhuman. The bell would ring at dawn, matins the first prayer. Then came chores, grooming horses, cleaning armor, hauling water. Then training, sword drills, shield formations, and endless marching in full armor under the desert sun. A knight could march 20 miles without water, climb sand dunes carrying 30 kilograms of steel, and still be expected to pray on his knees for an hour afterward. If he collapsed, he wasn't helped, he was tested. His brothers would stand over him in silence, waiting to see whether his faith or his flesh would give first. You might think this broke men, but that was the point. Templar discipline wasn't designed to build strength. It was designed to erase weakness. It stripped away individuality until nothing remained but obedience and faith. And if you think this sounds extreme, consider this. Templar initiation rituals sometimes included mock executions. Recruits were brought into dark chambers, blindfolded, surrounded by senior knights chanting psalms. They'd be made to kneel and place their necks on a block. The master's sword would touch their skin, not to cut, but to remind. You're already dead, the ritual said. From now on, you exist only to serve. What Hollywood never tells you is that the Templar's greatest weapon wasn't his sword. It was his will. The ability to endure agony without hesitation, to follow command without question, to see death not as horror, but as fulfillment. Pain wasn't the enemy. It was the proof of devotion. And this mentality extended far beyond training. In real battles, when their ranks were shredded by arrows and the ground was slick with blood, the Templars didn't retreat. They couldn't. Their vows forbade it. A knight who broke formation faced eternal damnation. Not disgrace, not punishment, but hell. So even when surrounded, even when dying, they stood. They fought until they couldn't move their arms. Chronicles describe scenes where Templars continued swinging their swords long after losing consciousness, their bodies locked in the reflexes of faith and fury. But let's step back from the battlefield. Let's look at the foundation that made such madness possible. The daily grind of discipline that began long before a Crusader ever reached Jerusalem. A recruit's day began with pain and ended with exhaustion. Training exercises weren't meant to simulate battle. They were meant to crush the ego. Some orders forced recruits to dig trenches under the noon sun while fasting. Others made them sleep in their armor for days to acclimate to discomfort. There were no personal belongings, no private moments. Bathing was rare because comfort was considered a temptation. In many ways, these men lived like penitents in armor, sinners begging for redemption through suffering. The phrase discipline in the 12th century didn't mean order or control. It meant punishment, from the Latin disciplina, which literally referred to correction through pain. To be disciplined was to be hurt, and this idea was baked into the medieval psyche. In monasteries, flagellation, self-whipping was already common. The Crusaders simply took that concept and weaponized it. They believed the body was a beast that must be tamed, beaten, and starved into obedience. The more it resisted, the more it revealed its corruption. Pain was proof that the soul still had work to do. In some fortresses, like the Templar stronghold at Saft or Croc de Chevaliers, the daily routine included confession at dawn, prayer at midday, silence during meals, and inspection at dusk. Every mistake, from an unshined helmet to a missed prayer, was logged, punished, and remembered. Repetition was their reality. Perfection was their obsession. And the strange part? It worked. This merciless discipline forged some of the most fearsome warriors of the medieval age. Men who could ride days without rest, fight surrounded without fear, and die smiling beneath the cross. Modern historians have tried to reconstruct their training using period manuals and archaeological data. The results are staggering. A full set of mail and plate weighed around 30 to 35 kilograms. Add the heat of the Middle East, dehydration, poor diet, and relentless labor, and you have an environment closer to slow torture than a training. Biomechanics studies have shown that wearing such armor could double heart rates, slow reaction times by 40%, and cause heat stroke within an hour. Yet Crusaders wore it all day. No modern soldier, athlete, or endurance runner operates under those conditions voluntarily. This was faith weaponized. The irony? For all their talk of purity, Crusader life was filthy, literally. Hygiene was seen as vanity. Armor rusted onto skin. Wounds festered under bandages. Men slept in flea-infested quarters beside horses and rotting rations. When you read their chronicles, you don't find tales of glory. You find lists of penances, confessions, and commands, cold, methodical instructions that reduce human suffering into protocol. The Crusader wasn't born through inspiration. He was forged through torment. And that's the secret the romanticized legends never tell you. Behind every shining sword, behind every red cross painted on white, there was blood, grime, and psychological conditioning so severe it bordered on madness. This wasn't medieval honor. It was medieval programming, a total rewiring of human instinct until pain became prayer and obedience became identity. So when you see paintings of noble knights kneeling at altars, remember this. Those same men might have spent the previous night crawling on gravel as punishment for failing to wake at the bell. Discipline, for a Crusader, wasn't about strength. It was about surrender. And this surrender, this willful extinction of self in the name of faith, is what made the Crusader orders both unstoppable and terrifying. Because once you remove fear, comfort, and self-preservation from the equation, you create something far more dangerous than any army. You create men who welcome pain, men who find holiness in torture, men who believe suffering is the highest form of love. And that is where the true darkness of Crusader discipline begins. You wake before dawn. The bell doesn't ring, it screams. Iron on iron, echoing through cold stone halls. The sound is your command, your God, your curse. You pull yourself off a straw mat, every muscle burning from yesterday's lesson. Your back still bleeds through your tunic. The air smells of oil, rust, and candle soot. You're not in a monastery, but it feels like one, except the prayers are drowned out by the clatter of chainmail and the groans of men dragging armor over wounds that never heal. This is the daily rhythm of a Crusader night, the rhythm of pain. By sunrise, the training yard is already alive. Dust storms twist across the ground, kicked up by boots and hooves. The sun, still low, cuts through the haze and narrow beams of gold that make every mote of dust look like a floating ember. You stand there, half-conscious, half-starved, waiting for the command. A Templar marshal walks past, his cloak dragging in the dirt. His voice is low, calm, terrifying. Today, he says, you break your will, or your will breaks you. The men beside you don't move. They've heard it 100 times. The meaning doesn't change. Obedience through pain. The first drill begins. Shield wall formation, the foundation of all Templar combat. You lock your shield edge to edge with the man beside you. The metal burns your forearm. The weight crushes your shoulder. The instructor shouts for the charge. And then, impact. A line of wooden pikes slams into your formation. You're thrown back, but ordered not to fall. If you stumble, you're whipped. If you cry out, you're shamed. You dig your boots into the ground, praying the sand will hold. Every second feels like an hour. The noise is deafening, wood cracking, men grunting, breath rasping through helmets. And just when you think you'll collapse, the instructor yells, hold. Silence. Then again, charge. It goes on for hours. The sun climbs. The air thickens. Your throat feels like it's lined with ash. Sweat and blood mix, dripping into your mouth, tasting like iron. This isn't battle. It's worse. Because in battle, pain ends with death. Here, it's the test that never ends. By noon, the sand beneath your boots has turned to mud from the blood and sweat. You think you'll faint, but fainting is forbidden. 2 recruits already have. They lie motionless in the dirt, faces gray. No one moves to help them. The marshal walks over, glances once, then turns away. Unworthy, he says flatly. No burial, no prayer. Their bodies will be carried out later, dumped beyond the walls. You realize, standing there in the heat, that this isn't training soldiers, it's weeding out humans. The goal isn't skill, it's submission. When historians speak of discipline, they often miss this. They imagine formation drills, strategy sessions, orderly ranks. But for the Crusaders, discipline wasn't about tactics. It was psychological warfare against their own flesh. They were taught that every impulse, hunger, thirst, exhaustion, fear, was a demon to be conquered. Their battlefield was internal. Their armor was not just steel, it was denial. And the rituals reinforced it. Every night, after training, came the confessions. The knights gathered in the chapel, kneeling on stone floors still warm from the day's heat. The room was dim, lit only by a few flickering candles. The air thick with incense, sweat, and guilt. Each man confessed his failures aloud. I faltered during prayer. I hesitated during the charge. I thought of my wife. The master listened. He never interrupted. When the confessions ended, punishment was assigned. Fasting, silence, lashes. The lash wasn't symbolic. It was applied immediately. They called it correction. One chronicler described it bluntly. We were iron beaten into blades by suffering. It's no metaphor. The average Templar training lasted years, with little distinction between spiritual and physical torment. They believed the two were the same. You didn't just train your body, you broke it. Because only the broken could truly obey. And yet, this system worked terrifyingly well. By the time a knight reached the battlefield, pain was irrelevant. Fear was extinct. Let's walk into one of those battles, say, the Battle of Hattin, 1187. The desert sun has turned the air into liquid fire. Saladin's forces outnumber the Crusaders 3-1. The Templars march in silence, banners limp in the heat. Every man knows they are marching to death. None speak. The Muslim archers begin their barrage. The sound is like a swarm of hornets. Arrows rain down, striking shields, armor, flesh. Horses scream. Men drop. And yet, the Templars don't scatter. They move as one, a living machine of agony and faith. Their shields bristle with arrows like porcupines. When a man falls, the line closes instantly. The survivors keep advancing, step by deliberate step, toward the center of the storm. Witnesses said the Crusaders fought as if death to death. Modern historians would call it suicidal discipline. Medieval chroniclers called it holiness. They had been trained to see themselves not as individuals, but as instruments, extensions of divine will. Their body wasn't theirs. Their pain wasn't punishment. Their suffering was sacred. That's why you'd never survive a day among them, because you'd beg for mercy. And mercy didn't exist here. Even their own brothers showed none. Take the practice of ordeals. In some orders, when a knight was accused of sin or cowardice, he had to prove his innocence through suffering. One ordeal involved holding a heated iron bar and walking several steps while reciting prayers. If his hands healed cleanly in 3 days, he was innocent. If they festered, guilty. Another was fasting, not for a day, but for 40. No meat, no wine, often no water except what was given in small rations. And the most feared punishment of all? Silence. To a Crusader, silence was death of the soul. Being ordered not to speak for a month, even during prayer, was psychological torment beyond words. Some broke down completely, confessing sins they hadn't committed just to end it. Pain purified the body. Silence crushed the spirit. Together, they erased humanity. Let's talk about the armor, the second skin of a Crusader. A full chainmail hauberk weighed 25 kilograms, covering the body from neck to knee. Add the coif for the head, the helmet, the sword, the shield, and the surcoat. You're carrying nearly half your body weight. Now imagine training in that under desert heat exceeding 40 degrees Celsius while fasting. You think dehydration is uncomfortable? A Crusader's urine turned dark brown by midday. Their tongues swelled. Some hallucinated from heat and lack of salt. Yet the order's rules forbade removing armor without permission. There are recorded cases of recruits dying mid-drill, their bodies literally cooking inside their mail. And still, the Templar chroniclers praised their endurance as the proof of divine favor. Even rest was agony. The rules allowed only a few hours of sleep, often broken into fragments around midnight prayers. Beds were forbidden. Men slept on mats, cloaked, armored, sometimes chained to their posts during siege duty. When you live like that for years, you stop being human. You become ritual. Every gesture, every breath, every step, obedience. This was the machine that Europe built and called holy. But the cruelty didn't always come from superiors. It was self-imposed. The most devout knights practiced voluntary mortification. They wore hair shirts, coarse wool that tore the skin. Some bound barbed chains around their thighs, hidden beneath clothing, tightening them every day to remind the flesh of its place. Others whipped themselves before sleep, muttering psalms as blood soaked the floor. A chronicler of the Hospitallers wrote that some brothers laughed through pain, for laughter was proof that the devil's hold was broken. These men didn't see pain as suffering. They saw it as victory. It's here, in this twisted logic, that Crusader discipline crosses from devotion into obsession. Because when agony becomes the path to salvation, cruelty becomes compassion. A master who flogs you isn't your enemy. He's your savior. And that's the horror. They believed it. Deeply. Completely. The psychological impact was devastating. Modern historians studying Crusader letters and confessions note patterns that resemble trauma conditioning. Emotional numbness, religious euphoria, alternating guilt and pride, all symptoms of what today we'd call spiritual PTSD. A knight could slaughter hundreds and feel nothing, then weep uncontrollably over missing a prayer. Their sense of morality fractured, replaced by ritual. Pain became their compass. If they weren't hurting, something was wrong. And this mindset carried into battle. When their comrades fell, they didn't mourn. They envied. Death wasn't loss. It was graduation. This is why Crusader discipline was more dangerous than any weapon they wielded. It created men incapable of fear, immune to pity, addicted to suffering. Their enemies saw it firsthand. Muslim chroniclers described the Templars as madmen who rushed toward death as lovers toward their brides. It wasn't poetry. It was accurate. Because when your training teaches you that torture is sacred, that agony brings you closer to God, you no longer need courage. You need only faith. But here's the paradox. This same brutal system made them extraordinary. Templars could march 30th kilometers a day, fight in 40 kilograms of gear, and maintain formation while bleeding. They were disciplined to the point of inhuman perfection. Their siege defenses were legendary. At Acre, 1291, when all hope was lost, Templar Knights held their fortress for days after the city fell. When the last wall collapsed, they refused surrender. Instead, they gathered in the chapel, sang prayers, and charged out, a final suicidal act of obedience. Historians found their remains decades later, still clutching swords, skulls caved in, armor blackened by fire. They died exactly as they lived, without hesitation. You could call it faith. You could call it madness. But for them, it was the same thing. And this brings us to the darkest truth of all. Crusader discipline wasn't about loyalty to God. It was about control. The church and the military orders discovered something terrifyingly effective, that if you can make a man believe pain is holy, you can make him do anything. You can make him march into death smiling. You can make him kill without mercy. You can make him silence his conscience because obedience feels righteous. It wasn't just faith that built Crusader armies. It was conditioning. Discipline as torture. Torture as devotion. Devotion as dominance. That's why it lasted for centuries. Because pain is the oldest and most reliable teacher. And the Templars learned to call it God. But even iron breaks eventually. And beneath the perfection of their discipline, cracks were forming. Whispers of doubt. Confessions of fatigue. Letters hidden in archives where anonymous brothers wrote that they could no longer tell whether they served Christ or cruelty. One wrote simply, "I no longer know if my suffering is holy or if hell begins here." That single line reveals what history tried to hide. The system worked, but it hollowed them out. They had traded humanity for holiness. And by the end, even the masters couldn't tell the difference. You wake one last time before dawn. The bell tolls again, the same merciless sound that has haunted every morning of your life as a crusader. But this time you don't move. Your hands are scarred. Your armor rusts where the sweat has eaten through. The chainmail feels heavier now, not because of metal, but memory. Every link is a confession. Every scratch is a sin forgiven through pain. You glance around the barracks. Some of your brothers are gone, dead, buried, forgotten. Others kneel in silence, whispering prayers into darkness. The candlelight paints their hollow faces in trembling gold, their eyes sunken but still burning with something between faith and madness. This is what the church called purity. This is what history calls discipline. But as the years have passed, you've started to wonder, discipline for what? The truth that the medieval world tried to bury is that Crusader discipline was never only about holiness. It was about control, fear, and power disguised as piety. To modern eyes, it looks monstrous. Men whipped for mercy, starved for salvation, and silenced for obedience. But to them, it was sacred order, a system that promised purpose in exchange for suffering. That's why it worked so completely. When the Templars marched, they didn't need speeches. They didn't need courage. Their obedience had been carved into their flesh, burned into their souls. The scars on their backs were their commandments. The blisters on their feet, their scripture. Pain was their Bible. But no system built on suffering lasts forever. Even the most devout machines eventually rust from the inside. By the 14th century, whispers of corruption began to spread. People questioned how these holy warriors could live in such wealth, owning castles, ships, and gold. The church turned on its own creation. The Templars were accused of heresy, arrested, and tortured by the very methods they had once sanctified. And that's the irony history can't ignore. The masters of pain were destroyed by pain itself. In 1307, Templar Knights were chained in dungeons, interrogated, whipped, and broken until they confessed to blasphemy. Many admitted to things they'd never done, spitting on crosses, worshipping false idols. Not because it was true, but because pain demands truth even where there is none. The order that once taught the world that agony purifies was now purified by fire. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive in 1314. Witnesses said he didn't scream. He just stood, staring into the crowd, until the flames took him. And for the first time in centuries, the world saw what the Templars had truly become. Not saints, not demons, but men so conditioned by suffering that even death could not shake their silence. You might think their legacy ended there, but it didn't. The idea survived. The belief that discipline through pain creates strength, that suffering refines the soul. It seeped into European knighthood, military doctrine, even modern warfare. The same logic echoes through boot camps, initiation rituals, and endurance training. The tools changed. The mindset didn't. Every time you hear phrases like, pain is weakness leaving the body, or discipline is freedom, you're hearing the faint echo of the Crusader creed. The same voice that told men to bleed for God and call a holiness. It's seductive, isn't it? The idea that pain means progress, that suffering equals purpose. It gives meaning to chaos. It makes struggle feel sacred. But that's the danger. Because once you believe pain redeems you, you stop questioning who's inflicting it. Look closer at the Crusaders, and you'll see something terrifyingly human. A mirror, not a myth. They weren't monsters. They were ordinary men trapped inside a belief system that convinced them torture was virtue. They prayed for strength and found it in agony. They sought redemption and found it in obedience. You might think you'd never fall for such madness, but you do. Every time you glorify suffering without asking why. The gym grind, the hustle culture, the toxic mantra that says, if it doesn't hurt, it doesn't matter. It's the same poison, refined and repackaged for a modern age. We still worship the idea that to be worthy, we must first endure torment. That's the last surviving relic of the Crusades. Imagine it. A Templar Knight, centuries ago, kneeling in a dark chapel. His armor dented, his face scarred. Before him stands a wooden crucifix, carved crudely but revered beyond measure. He presses a bloodied hand to his chest and whispers, Domini, non sum dignus, Lord, I am not worthy. Then he rises, straps on his sword, and walks out to kill and die for a god he's never seen. You call it madness. He called it order. And perhaps the line between them was never as clear as we'd like to believe. The Templars believed that through pain, they could transcend fear. Through suffering, they could approach divinity. But in reality, their discipline didn't lead them to heaven. It bound them to the darkest parts of themselves. That's what medieval history hides behind holy language. Not courage, but conditioning. Not honor, but indoctrination. A Templar didn't fight for glory. He fought because he could not. His was no longer his own. It had been broken, reforged, and baptized in agony until it no longer questioned orders, only executed them. That is what made them both invincible and doomed. And that's why their story still fascinates, because deep down, we recognize the same hunger. The desire to be remade, to belong, to have purpose so absolute that even pain feels like proof. But that kind of purpose always comes with a price. Modern excavations of Templar sites, from Acre to Cyprus, reveal something the chronicles never said. Beneath training courtyards lie layers of compacted sand, bones, and metal fragments. Archaeologists found grooves etched into the stone from years of weapon drills. Thousands of repetitions carved into rock by calloused hands. You can almost hear the echo of the whip, the breath of exhausted men, the prayers whispered through blood. This wasn't just a military order. It was an endurance cult. And those marks, the scars on the earth, outlasted the men themselves. That's the real history of Crusader discipline. Not honor, not bravery, but the systematic transformation of suffering into structure. It's the proof that humans can turn anything, even torment, into routine. So when you picture a Crusader now, don't imagine a shining knight riding through dust with banners high. Picture this instead. A man kneeling alone in the dark, his armor cold against his skin, his lips split from thirst, whispering prayers not to be saved, but to be worthy of more pain. That's the real Crusader, not a hero, but a hostage to his own faith. And in that realization lies the final secret of medieval history's darkest discipline. They didn't conquer through strength. They conquered through surrender. They won not because they were fearless, but because they had forgotten what fear felt like. They became living relics, flesh forged into ideology. And when the fire finally consumed their order, it didn't destroy them. It revealed them. Revealed what happens when belief demands pain and obedience becomes identity. So the next time you hear the word discipline, remember what it used to mean. Not self-control, not order, but punishment. Remember the Templar standing silent as the whip cracked across his back. Remember the heat, the blood, the obedience that replaced thought. Remember the cost of confusing holiness with hurt. Because the line between sacred suffering and senseless cruelty is thinner than history wants to admit. And once you cross it, it doesn't feel like torture anymore. It feels like truth. That's the danger. That's the legacy. And that was the Crusaders' darkest secret.